The views and opinions expressed on this program are not necessarily those of this station, JVC Broadcasting Management, or its sponsors. Hi, this is Valerie Shivers, the host of Will You Trust Me, airing Saturday mornings at 11:30 a.m. We are estate planning and elder law attorneys focused on asset protection. We have offices in Sayville and in Garden City and can be reached at 631-569-4334 or on the web at shiverslg.com. So in the news, I'm sure many of you either read or heard of the local man who ended up killing his family after the death of his mother. And not to start on such a somber note, but that story really resonated with me because the background to the story, without going into too much detail, is that this older man had lived with his mother. I believe she was in her 90s. She was very old. He lived with her his whole life, and she passed away. The family flew in from other states and they convened after her death and funeral to discuss what next. What do we do now with the assets? Do we sell the home? He arrived at the family meeting, and unfortunately, I do believe he had some mental illness as well, but he ended up shooting and murdering his entire family and then killing himself as well. And, you know, it was obviously such a tragedy, unbelievably upsetting. And I just couldn't help but think to myself as I'm reading this article, you know, that could someone have done something to help this transition, you know, so that this man, because the article does go on to say that he was concerned with the fact that the family was coming in, selling this home or planning to sell the home, and he'd have no place to go. And, you know, that's terrible because, first of all, without getting into, again, the specific details of the story, but I'm thinking of my own clients who will come into the office and tell me that they want to prepare a will. They do have a child that lives in the home with them, and they want to make sure that when they pass away, this child's going to have somewhere to live. You know, we always think about estate planning as, oh, well, let's just put together a will, put together a trust, so that someday when we pass, our assets just go where we want. But there are a lot of other factors that have to be taken into consideration, and it's very worth it. And honestly, this is one of the best parts of my job. It's worth it to sit down with us to get a better understanding of your particular family dynamic. You know, if you have a child who is living in the home, or you have a child who is disabled, and if you pass away, the question becomes, well, what next? What happens to that child? Maybe you don't want them to stay in the home. Maybe you do. Maybe you want to give them a period of time to be able to either obtain a mortgage or gather enough funds to be able to find another place or rent something. And these are all conversations that I have with my clients at the initial consultation. So it's not just, okay, where do you want your assets to go? Who do you want to be in charge? At what age? There is so much more involved with the estate planning process. And I couldn't help but think to myself, I wonder if that ever occurred in this particular situation with this family. I wonder if the children or mom had ever taken the time to speak with an attorney and say, here's my current situation. My adult son is really dependent on me and has lived with me and has never held a job or has no way to make any sort of income, or, you know, has mental illness. And I'm concerned for this child. I'm concerned because I need to make sure that A, he's going to have a place to go, B, I want to make sure my other children are compensated from my estate? How can I match these two worlds? How can I accomplish everything that I'm looking to do? And let's just assume that that's the case here, because we really don't know. In the alternative, it could simply be, well, when I pass away, I want my child to go find, their own home and figure it out on their own, which, by the way, is acceptable also. And these are very real conversations that I have with my client. When they tell me that a child, or anyone for that matter, is living in the home with them, the first question I have for them is, well, if you were to pass away, where do you want this person to go? And occasionally, the client will say, well, I want them to stay. And if that's the case, then in the documents, it's incredibly important that we either give that child what's called a right of occupancy, which allows them to remain in the home for a period of time, for as long as they're occupying the property. And by the way, the right of occupancy can be for lifetime. It can be for a period of 6 months, 2 years, 3 years, whatever the case may be. But let's just say we want to give them a right of occupancy, assuming that they maintain the taxes and they maintain the upkeep of the home and they don't leave for an extended period of time. I've had clients say to me, I'll give my child a right of occupancy, assuming that they don't move anyone else into the home, because perhaps there are other children involved. Perhaps, they want to make sure that, yes, this child has a place to live while they're occupying the home, but once they leave, the home is to be sold and distributed to the remaining children. And then I'll have a conversation with the clients to say, okay, well, your children are all around the same age. What happens if this one child who's living at the home lives there for the rest of their lives and they never leave, right? What if they pass away and they are 90 years old and your other children are also around that age? And is it okay with you that they might not inherit until they reach the age of 90? They might never even see their inheritance. And if that's the case, sometimes clients will say, all right, well, maybe we need to put some sort of stipulations on that. Maybe we need to say, obviously, the child living with me will have gone through a very difficult time in losing me in my passing. So I want to give them a time frame. I want to say they have a year to either choose or opt to purchase the home or leave and find an alternate living space. And again, there's a lot that we can stipulate. We can say we will give that child the right of first refusal, meaning they have the right to purchase that home at fair market value. In fact, we can even stipulate and say we need 3, unbiased opinions from professionals to give a fair market value. Sometimes clients will say, forget the fair market value. I want to just stipulate this is what the home is to be sold for. You can really do anything. And really, the reason I'm going through all of these scenarios and explaining all of the different options available is because there is so much that we can do if you plan ahead, if you plan properly. And many times my clients will say to me, I'm here because I want to make things easy for my children. I want to make things simple for my beneficiaries. When I pass away, I don't want anyone to fight. I don't want them to spend a lot of money. I want everything that I've worked for to pass simply and easily to my beneficiaries. And quite frankly, planning does just that. Not planning causes the fighting, right? How much easier, and who can argue, quite frankly, with a trust or a will that says, upon my passing, this person is given the right to live in the home for 1 year. And then at that point, I want a fair market value analysis done on this home. And in the event that child does not choose to purchase, then the home is to be immediately sold and divided evenly. Really, as long as you have a proper estate plan that is clear as day and doesn't leave room for any interpretation, doesn't leave room for any fighting, who can argue with that? They are going to fail miserably. In fact, a lot of times now we're putting language into our documents that say, if you attempt to fight over this and if you attempt to argue otherwise and you lose, you lose your inheritance and you'll get nothing. So it's actually a deterrent to the children or to our beneficiaries to say, listen, don't argue with me, because if you do and you lose, you're getting nothing. So what I say goes, and it's your kind of your last, goodbye. I've done this for you. I've created these documents so that family does not fight. And really, do you want to pit your loved ones against one another when you're not here? Because quite frankly, you can't fix anything once you're gone, which is why the estate planning process is so important. And it's not something that should be done online. It's not something that should be done overnight. We're going to take a quick break. Again, this is Valerie Shivers. I am an estate planning and elder law attorney, and I can be reached at 631-569-4334 or on the web at shiverslg.com. Hi, this is Valerie Shivers, the host of Will You Trust Me, airing Saturday mornings at 11:30 a.m. We are estate planning and elder law attorneys focused on asset protection. We have offices in Sayville and in Garden City and can be reached at 631-569-4334 or on the web at shiverslg.com. Often I discuss the importance of planning ahead to protect your assets. It's very important that you have your wills and your trusts and your documents in place so that if you need long-term care, everything you've worked for is going to be protected. We don't really discuss, and I'm thinking we really should discuss the importance of estate planning for the purpose of making things simpler for your beneficiaries, right? So we do estate planning and we protect our assets so that if we need care, we're going to be protected. But what if we don't? And the reality is we really don't want to need to be in a nursing home, and we don't want to need long-term care. And in many instances, my clients don't, right? They live long, healthy lives, and they live out their last days in their homes and pass away peacefully. And I don't know how many of you have been listening to the news. It's difficult because sometimes I hear these bad news stories and I just want to turn everything off. But this one story really resonated with me because it is about a local man who was living at home with his mother, and his mother passed away. He lived with her his whole life, and his mother passed away at a very old age. The family flew in from out of state, the other siblings, to discuss what was going to happen next. Really, what were they going to do with mom's assets? How were they going to distribute the assets? What were they going to do with the home? And this one child who had been living with mom ended up coming to the family meeting and killing everyone, including himself. And it was a horrific scene and an absolute tragedy. And when I'm reading this article, there is, there's a quote that says the perception of this man is that he was being cut out of the will. So this individual, who it's assumed that he has some mental issues, this individual felt that he was being cut out of his mom's will. And as a result, he decided to just take everyone's lives, including himself. And it was so upsetting to me because I'm thinking to myself, well, did she have a will in place? You have this child who is living with you, and did you think, or did the family think, perhaps this is something we should address during mom's lifetime? Perhaps we should discuss this particular situation, someday mom is going to pass away. There's no question. We're all going to pass away someday. And when that happens, what do we anticipate? What does mom want to happen with this home? Because many times when I'm talking with my clients, they will say to me, well, my child lives with me and I want them to stay there. I want them to have the ability to just live in the home. And sometimes I don't know that they know exactly what that entails and what that means, for the other children. Because when I ask, well, what do you want the other children? Are you eliminating them from your will? Do you not want them to inherit the home? More often than not, the client says to me, no, I want everything to pass equally to my kids. I just don't want this one child to have to leave the house. And, I will have a very real conversation with my client at that time and say, okay, well then now we need to discuss who's going to be responsible for the upkeep of this home, who's going to pay the taxes, what happens if the child who's living in the home doesn't do that, right? Because now you're taking an asset that is, a value, and by not paying the taxes or not keeping up on the home, we may be decreasing the value of this asset. And now we might be causing some serious animosity amongst your children. And a lot of times my clients haven't even given that any thought, and they think to themselves, oh, well, that's not what I want. I'm looking to do this estate planning so that I can simplify my estate and make things easier for my children. And the last thing that most of my clients want is for their children to fight after their parents have passed away. So this is all part of the estate planning process. It's very important. And this is really just one particular situation, a child living in the home. But there are many other scenarios that are worth discussing from a long-term care standpoint. Some people will say to me, well, is there any way we can give them a period of time to stay in the home? Maybe give them a year, 6 months to go out there and obtain a mortgage, or to buy their siblings out, right? They can do that. Or if they don't have that opportunity, well, then maybe after a year's time, after they're able to get back on their feet and recover from the loss of a loved one, maybe it's time to sell the home and make sure that everyone is entitled to their fair share of the estate, so that no one beneficiary has to wait for many, many years before they inherit. Maybe that's something that you want to do. And again, a lot of times, I'll discuss this with families and they'll say to me, well, brother lives in the home and sister's okay with it. She doesn't mind. Or maybe the answer is, okay, well, if we're giving this home in essence to this one child, then maybe we think about leaving all of the other assets to the other siblings. There's a lot that we can do. And I like to think of estate planning just as a holistic. We're looking at everything. We're looking at the assets that you have. We're looking at your long-term goals. We're trying to get a good understanding of family dynamic. What happens after you pass? Are you the glue holding the family together? Do you anticipate that everyone's going to get along after? Or perhaps everyone gets along all fine and good, but we also have to think about, what about their spouses? What if they get married? What if they're not quite as in tuned or willing to allow one child to live in the home? It's very, very important to have this all mapped out, because unfortunately things can get very complicated and very ugly after someone passes away and there's money involved. So the moral of the story is estate planning can prevent a lot of arguments, a lot of family strife, and really can make things clear cut so that no one has the opportunity to argue with what's in writing, with the estate plan that's been presented. And, I'm finding more and more that when my clients are preparing their legal documents, especially when they prepare a will, because when you have a will, we still have to probate that will, which means that if you decide to eliminate children from your will or other beneficiaries, if they're considered distributees, if you're opting to eliminate them, well, recognize that during the probate process, some of these people might have an opportunity to contest, even if they're not named in the will, even if you give them a minor amount in the will, they might choose to contest. And do we want to give them that opportunity? Do we want to give them that forum? If not, there's a lot that we can do by way of naming beneficiaries to accounts or creating different types of trusts so that the probate process is not something that ever has to take place. And in that case, no one really has the forum to contest or argue. And, that being said, in our documents, I'm finding a lot of my clients are saying, well, could you put something into them that says, in the event someone chooses to argue, if they don't agree with what I say, then can we ensure that they don't get anything? And yes, we absolutely can do that. That's called an interorum clause. So, people have a hard time believing, well, who can argue with me? These are my assets. This is my will. This is my trust. What I say goes. Unfortunately, that's not always the case. And a lot of these probate proceedings or contested probate proceedings, we can see them dragged out for years before anyone inherits. And if we're looking to eliminate that altogether, well, we absolutely can do that. And these are all conversations that we will have in our consultation. We do offer a free consultation. It's so incredibly important to me that my clients have strong legal documents that reflect their wishes and really protect their families and everything that they've worked so hard for. This is Valerie Shivers, the host of Will You Trust Me? I can be reached at 631-569-4334 or on the web at shiverslg.com. Have a great weekend.
The views and opinions expressed on this program are not necessarily those of this station, JVC Broadcasting Management, or its sponsors.